everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex. Once again, this is Big Baby Reviews. I am joined by my good bud, Mark Darden. There he is. And today we're continuing on basically from our last video where we rated the Image Founding Fathers on storyline and writing. Last review. This one today, we're going to be looking at the artistic merits of the Image Founding Fathers. And we're going to start it off going from 1 to 6 because, as you know, Willis Pertassi was not included in this list and countdown. So my number one issue is on the screen right now by Todd McFarlane, Spawn issue number 1. All around, Todd is probably my favorite Image artist, and before that, Marvel artist, at least from the late 80s, early 90s. Multiple reasons. I use this word a lot when I talk about artists that I like, but it really does apply, especially with Todd. I just find his art so evocative. There's something exciting about it. In the level of detail he throws in there, in the weird posturing he incorporates into his art, the very kind of dynamic hands that he draws, and just the all-around level of excitement I think that he gets through with his art, whether it's on Spider-Man, which, you know, I think he learned a lot of tricks working on that. His, you know, following Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man, I noticed a lot of things. You know, his level of shading really improved all throughout his work at Marvel. Early on when he was doing the Hulk and stuff, it was kind of a clear line style. He wasn't really doing any shadowing at all. I feel like maybe he just didn't feel adept at it, and he got way better at it, especially during the Spider-Man series. It was more of a horror tinged kind of a vibe to it, and with Spawn as well. So lots of shadows that he added in. He got really good at it. And there's just something about his design work, his layouts, excuse me, his overlapping, using decorative elements in design on his panel borders that, you know, just make his art all around exciting, whether it's an action scene or whether it's just two characters talking. And the cover, of course, of Spawn number 1 is a pretty iconic cover and a good example of what I'm talking about. And his, I'll say his use of layering in art is just second to none. You know, here on the cover, obviously we know with Spawn, he's got a lot of opportunities for that layering of the cape, right? It's that one element that really adds depth to all the Spawn images, especially on this one where there's no real actual background. And just clever design work, like throwing in these bats in the foreground, just once again to add that extra bit of layering that gives that image more depth.
Man, yeah, it's a good
stand for number 1.
Yeah, there are so many good shots in it. There's so many pages where it's easily a pinup that you could throw on the wall. I mean, there's of course the super cool graphic one that we talked about before, where it's, you know, just the design of the mask in the background with the shots of his girl and the skulls. That one's amazing. The 2-page spread is cool. I mean, he's doing a lot of, you know, great things with the costume design. Multiple splash pages. There's some good action shots. Yeah, there's a lot I'd agree with. The shot where there's throwing the guy through the glass and the shattering of the glass backdrop is very cool. Tons of awesome stuff. So I can't argue with your pick, but I'll have a different one.
Yeah, I'll just throw in real quick something I didn't mention, Todd's design sense. So I think, you know, like when it comes to his anatomy, there might be, you know, some shots that aren't so great, and draftsmanship maybe not as strong as some of the other artists we're going to be looking at, but his design sense really just pulls it all together and makes everything exciting, and I think is something that really defines that early 90s period and that he really made popular.
Yeah, I mean, that page 2 were just the slanted buildings, which are all awesome looking buildings, and they're not just slanted this way where like you draw it and turn it. They're also going away from you a little bit. They're slanted a little bit so that you're seeing the lower part of the building and the top part's going away. That's awesome. The lightning shots. Steve Oliff does really good on colors. Those 2 pages where this is 9-panel grid showing the past, those visual flashes and like the purple to the orange, purple, orange, purple, orange. There's tons to love. I mean, there's no arguing how great visually it is. I would say for Image, the top 3 are a super hard battle for me of like, out of these three books, I could almost flip flop them depending on my mood.
So,
My
so
number
just so
one.
we know for the needs of the list, where had you placed Todd on that list?
So I have Todd at 3,
Okay.
but it's the top 3 for me are so strong. I could flip them around. When I was a kid, actually he came in at 3 as a kid. He's bumped up. Well, he stayed in the same spot. Some other folks moved a little, but because initially I was super stoked on Rob. That was my guy. I always loved the bombastic art. And then Jim Lee was like my number 2, where I just loved all his stuff on X-Men. And Todd came in at 3 because I was really into his Spider-Man stuff. So he's maintained at 3. My number 1, I was Savage Dragon, and it was very tough to pick between the top 3. And the reason that I came around to Savage Dragon was the fact that I could turn to just about any page and it's just like, oh, what's that? The costume designs. I love the bright colors. So the colors did a great job making all the art. It's like it's pop. It pops. It's fun. It's exciting to look at. And I think that's a big part of what made me really like the comic. Also, the anatomy is very sound. I mean, it's cartoony. It's not like it's 100% lifelike, but it's very sound. And just every page is fun to look at. And that really played a lot into it for me. There was doing the full bleed on a lot of pages, which is a ton of fun. Again, the costume design, all the characters are just visually fun to look at. And the fact that there's a lot of action does make it easier. I mean, every page I flip to, it's almost always somebody throwing something, shooting something. So there's a lot of fun in that. There's a good splash page, double page. But it's just a really fun book to look at. I'm flipping through it and I'm like, I just love all of it. So that was a big part of what played into me liking it, number 1. And also, while we're doing art, not the storytelling, but visually, it's a great storytelling book as well, which is part of doing your art. Is like, I know what's going on via the art. So even if you're not reading the words, now a lot of it's a fight, so it's kind of easy to know what's going on. But we talked about it before, where throughout his fights, it's constantly different poses, and you're not seeing a repeat from one to the next. So that's also a lot of fun, that like you're just going to get one time of bam, and then there's this, and then there's a guy coming down and jumping.
Yeah, he's
And
constantly changing angles, right? And points of view.
yes, yeah, the change of the angles, the different moves, there's the different paneling, there's the different layouts. He does a really great job throughout. And for me, I think the color is also part of what plays into it, because all the pages pop from how bright the colors are. It's a lot of fun to look at. Yeah.
Listen, like you said with the colors, what I liked about Savage Dragon 2 was, the general look of the colors and the palettes they were using were, at least originally on the miniseries, much different than, say, Spawn or Cyberforce. It's like each image title almost had a distinctive like color identity to a certain extent, right? And Savage Dragon was definitely more kind of saturated and colorful than Spawn. Spawn was a bit darker and muted. And I think both fit both titles really well. I've talked about before how when Steve Oliff came on Dragon, not that I think he did a bad job, but I still preferred the colorist. I think it's Gregory Wright from the miniseries. I just felt it worked with the art better. So yeah, listen, I think I would agree with you that the top 2, at least for me, could really be a toss-up between Eric Larson and Todd McFarlane. I think they both have strengths, and Todd maybe has a few weaknesses that really I don't think Eric Larson has. But there's just something about Todd's detail and his particular line, the distinctive line that he's got, that I find maybe a little bit more interesting overall. But I mean, yeah, Larson could probably be the number 1 choice here as well. I think as an artist, a draftsman, his anatomy, his foreshortening, his storytelling, his layouts, and just how easy it is to read the story visually, like you said, if you don't take into account any of the dialogue or anything, easily understandable as to what's going on. He's just the most kind of solid draftsman, and in spite of that, his art is not boring. Sometimes those artists that we say are great draftsmen tend to be more kind of illustrative, I guess is how I'd put it, where you know Larson just cranks up the energy to 11. He's got that, Walt Simonson, Jack Kirby kind of energy and inspiration behind it, with again the extreme foreshortening and the big fists, and kind of, I guess, a classic, uh, to an extent, classic Marvel vibe, I guess, that Jack Kirby, Walt Simonson feel once again. And he's also created a character that I find, probably out of all the Image guys, maybe even past Spawn, like the most iconic, the most, that you could put in that pantheon of characters that stuck around, and that the design didn't change too much, or didn't need to change too much. Even though
Yeah.
now, obviously, in the Dragon series, it's no longer this character; it's his son.
Yeah.
That original design is just very solid to me and works really well. We've talked about how sometimes, just if you can recognize a character from his silhouette, that's probably a very successful design, and I feel like he's got that. And just the level of energy that, just this cover that we're looking at here, it just really moves. He's got the rubble flying around him and stuff. Just a solid artist all around. I can't really find any fault with what he does, and just a great storyteller as well. It's that level of energy, like I said, that I feel he's got a little bit more than Todd McFarlane, maybe. And you talked about the anatomy, again, very sound. It's just that he knows how to exaggerate it, and especially in terms of superhero comics, that makes total sense. It's where Jack Kirby would exaggerate the anatomy, but sometimes there were just kind of weird, wonky lines and just weird shapes and things. Larson is just completely sound in his representation of the human anatomy.
Yeah, and I definitely on the counter side, I can't disagree with Spawn, where there's a lot of details put into just making each page different.
Yeah,
and that is smart, as you're and the design quality of it, where there's almost graphic design pages.
100%. Yeah, he's they're both coming at it from a different. They're both great artists, but I feel
Yeah,
like Larson's real emphasis is on storytelling, and Todd's is more on design and like wowing you with each page, and each page being interesting. Not that each page of Savage Dragon is not, but you do sometimes have what I would deem the conversation pages in Savage Dragon, or the storytelling pages, getting some plot through, some exposition, which can be a little tamer, even though he still finds interesting layouts and stuff, can definitely be tamer than, what Todd McFarlane does with a conversational page.
yeah, and Todd has pages where he's doing a lot of blacks, darkening out shapes, and then there's ones that are highly detailed. He does constantly change the layouts and the paneling, just changing out like the size of the boxes. Or I mean, I'm looking at a page here where there's a figure that extends outside the panel, but he's still blocked off. So it's just constantly there's something different, and yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's extremely hard to argue against.
And the
The
needs of their individual books too, because they're going for two different vibes, right? Like
Yeah,
Larson is definitely going more for superhero kind of action adventure. Todd, there's some of that in Spawn, but it's, really kind of a horror vibe, I guess, that he's
yeah,
starting off from. And maybe it feels a little bit more like a superhero book early on, but really graduates more and more into kind of a horror comic to a certain extent, right? With some superhero elements thrown in. A lot of
yeah. My
confusing.
number two is Youngblood. I loved it as a kid. It's still a just extremely visually fun book to pop through. Uh, I mean, the cover, of course, is super fun. It's just such a great layout of the figures. Their poses are fantastic. There's a lot of pictures in here that I learned to draw, like looking at and wanting to do it the way he did it. Everybody's kind of, they're large, they're exciting. Again, this one got a really good colorist, which is fantastic. And it's too bad that while Steve Oliff is of course amazing, there's no putting down how good he is, but it was great how unique the books were in the beginning with their different colorists.
Absolutely.
And Steve Oliff was only on Spawn. He then was later on Dragon and Youngblood, and of course the Max. But initially they had different vibrant colorists who were doing something different, giving each one a unique look. So I really love Youngblood. There's so many facial shots that are great. There's a lot of great team shots, and yeah, the colors really help make it pop a ton. Yeah, I mean, Rob was just going for it throughout all the book, as we've talked about before. So many dynamic, explosive shots. And much like Kirby, sometimes the costumes change a little bit from panel to panel, where, hey, there's a pad there and now it's gone, and he's got a glove on, and then it's gone, but it's back. But still, it was a ton of fun.
Yeah, those are things I can always kind of excuse because I feel like the energy level that's being put into the work and that's coming across on the page more than compensates for that. And I have to assume at that time, we know early on a lot of these guys were almost like, working 18, 20-hour days because they were finishing up some Marvel stuff and then working on their creator owned first issue. So there was some overlap there. So they were putting in lots of hours. So I can imagine, working at that breakneck speed that you would miss some stuff like that, right? And I like your comment too, again, about again, bringing back this idea that originally, with at least the first few issues of their titles, all of them had very distinct colorists and color schemes that, to me, originally worked really well with each individual title. And then by getting Steve Oliff, it's like everyone kind of saw Spawn and went, "Oh my God, Steve Oliff is amazing," and he is, like you said. But it doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to translate over into your book, which has a vastly different storyline and a vastly different vibe, right? So not that the colors that he did on Youngblood or Savage Dragon were bad in any way, but it's almost like the coloring and image became homogenized at a certain extent. I don't know, not by design necessarily, but then all the image books kind of looked similar color wise, where it was much more fun with the first few issues where they all had kind of distinct coloring identities. And I think worked better with the art as well, especially in the case of Savage Dragon and Youngblood. I think both those books benefited from much more bright, kind of colorful, saturated colors, where Spawn, obviously the dark muted look works really well with the subject matter there. So I'll talk about Youngblood a little bit later because it is not even my third choice. We'll move on to choice number 3 for me, and then we'll move on to yours. So number 3 for me was Jim Lee on Wildcats. Now, I was a huge Jim Lee fan at the time, probably even more so as a kid than Todd McFarlane, at least originally, because I discovered Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld before I discovered Todd McFarlane. And Jim Lee was really the top guy. Him and Rob Liefeld were kind of my guys originally. Um, and I've talked about before, I just feel like this period of Jim Lee, when he's doing X-Men and then Wildcats, is peak Jim Lee to me. I don't see as much of the stiff kind of poses that he eventually starts doing, I feel, with some of his later work at Marvel and DC. And there's just something just so perfect all around about the anatomy, the rendering, the again the blocking of the characters and the poses and stuff, where it feels a little more naturalistic than again the stiffness that I feel he's got in some of his poses and his characters later on. And there's something, maybe I think as a kid, a little more appealing, when you're not quite, when you haven't been exposed to that many different artists and different styles. Jim Lee just has something that seems to please everyone. And you kind of go, yeah, that guy knows how to draw, right? Like as a kid, I remember thinking, wow, Jim Lee, like what he does is so realistic. And obviously now I know that that's not exactly true. I do think he's probably aiming for a little bit more realism than, say, a Rob Liefeld, an Eric Larson, or a Todd McFarlane, being somewhat more accurate to real life.
Mhm.
But it's kind of the zeitgeist of that period, right? Like, Todd McFarlane sold a few million Spider-Mans. Rob Liefeld sold a bit more than he did. And then Jim Lee came in with X-Men. And that was just like the peak of that whole, movement of selling millions and millions of books. And I think they're up to like someone saying he sold like 7 million copies of X-Men #1 or something. So there clearly was something, that everyone enjoyed about Jim Lee's art. I think what sold X-Men #1 the most, even though Chris Claremont was involved in it, was the Jim Lee art. And right here, again, he's right in that peak phase. So this first issue that we looked at just has some amazing art all the way throughout.
Yeah. Actually, one thing that's kind of interesting is that I wonder how much having 5 different covers that form one cover played into getting people to buy more copies versus X-Force came with 5 different trading cards. Did
Sure.
people care more about covers over trading cards? And Spawn didn't really have, or not Spawn. Spider-Man didn't really have so much the different covers. I mean, there was a little bit of difference in them with
But it
some,
wasn't a different image, right? So it was
yeah,
just the same image colored differently,
yeah.
right? So I'm sure people bought multiple copies. Um, but I think Jim Lee's X-Men #1 was just the height of that
Oh yeah. Yeah.
collector's mindset that like, wow, I got to get, and they were smart about it, like you said, because, with Spider-Man, you like, well, okay, they're colored differently, but it's still the same image. So I'll just get one. And then X-Force comes out and it's like, oh, wow, there's these different trading cards, but it's the same cover again. Do I really need all the trading cards? Some guys did, I'm sure, bought them all. And it was in a bag. So then you open the bag, it's worth less. At least that's the mindset back then. So, with X-Men, I think they just figured out the perfect gimmick where it was like, hey, we've got 4 different covers, right? Not in a poly bag, and if you combine them together, you can have the whole image to yourself. And then on top of that, they put out this kind of, I don't know what it's called, a special edition that had the whole gatefold cover, which was
Yeah.
colored horribly, I want to say, as opposed to the original covers, which had pretty cool coloring overall. So I don't know why they chose to color it differently. I guess to make it distinct from those ones. But yeah, I just thought the coloring sucked on that collected cover edition.
Yeah, and it had some extra art as well. There was additional.
It had all the pinups, right? Because each issue had a different pinup inside of that issue, #1 issue. So each cover had a distinct pinup at the end. There's that, you probably remember that shot where they're all by the pool,
Yeah.
right? Then there's kind of uh, an image where you've got all the X-Men and all the villains and stuff in there, and that special edition collected them all, as well as the whole gatefold cover.
Yeah, and you had to get all 5 to get the special one, which I silly did do that, and I don't know what happened to the other ones. I had the combined one still, but
Oh
I don't
yeah,
have
eh?
ones. Yeah, yeah, I got
Listen,
sucked into that.
I remember, like, this is just my early comics collecting. Like I told you before, I discovered that comic book shops even existed. So it was just off the newsstand at the corner store. And I remember walking in, and me and my buddy had started buying a bit of comics. I think I bought X-Force 2 at this point. Like that was my most recent purchase. And then getting in there and seeing the multiple covers, and we are just like kind of blown away. Wow, and who's this Jim Lee guy? The art's amazing. And unfortunately, my buddy called the Wolverine Cyclops cover right away because we knew who Wolverine was. So everyone wanted that Wolverine cover.
Yeah,
And I got stuck with the Gambit Colossus Psylocke cover, unfortunately. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then that Magneto pose is so ridiculous. It's a cool pose, but then it makes no sense in the context of the battle of the other people rushing and like, hey man, all the enemy are like over there coming at you, and you're like, hey.
Yeah. Well, he's so all powerful that he doesn't even have to face
Yeah,
his opponents, right? He could just disrespect them and turn their back to them, right? Yeah,
yeah,
and then years later, I realized that that's obviously a play on the cover of the original X-Men #1, right, where they're all kind of attacking Magneto. Um, someone had to
yeah,
point it out to me, and then when it was, I was like, oh my god, like so
yeah. Good
obvious.
point. Yeah. So okay,
But
so my number 3, I kind of really already talked about it, and it was Spawn.
oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the draftsmanship, all the cool pinup shots, the 2-page spread. There's multiple splash pages. It's a fantastic book, and really going through. I mean, the top 3 of Savage Dragon and Spawn and Youngblood. It's really hard to pick between all of these because they started Image for a reason. They were all incredible artists, and picking one versus the next is very challenging. But yeah, I had Spawn at number 3.
All right. So let's go then with my number 4. And again, this has changed now from what I probably would have said as a kid. Youngblood would have been a little bit higher. For me, it's a little bit lower now. Just because, again, if we're talking about art, and now I know a little bit more about art, I just think Mark Silvestri, not that Rob Liefeld's not a fun, exciting artist, but as far as just fundamentals, draftsmanship, all that stuff, Mark Silvestri is kind of one of the goats for sure. And even all the Image guys have said it, amongst themselves, they agree that Mark Silvestri was probably the best artist amongst them. And just because this early Cyberforce still presents a lot of that stuff that I liked from his Uncanny X-Men and Wolverine run at Marvel, very kinetic, very moving. Like I've talked about it before, where I find it's kind of like a more kinetic, dynamic Jim Lee. And there's just a bit of a rougher kind of feel to the lines and grittier look that I really like. And he's just, if just look at this cover here, he's a master at posing everyone and everyone in a cool, different position. Um, and storytelling wise within the book as well, things really move and things are really dynamic. That's, I guess, the main thing with Silvestri is just, I feel like the characters really come alive on the page and they're always kind of moving, even though obviously we're looking at still images. And there's just something I like about this period, once again, of Mark Silvestri's hatching and just how he tackles the page and how he composes things.
So I'm basically one behind you. So my number 4 is Wildcats.
Okay.
He was my number 2 when I was a kid, but number 4 now. And my reason for him being there has a lot to do with, again, costumes, having a lot of visually cool looking characters. There's a lot of action scenes in the book, which helps to make it to where I can flip to a lot of pages where I'm excited by what I'm looking at. It's got a lot of neat layups. And like you mentioned, as a kid, it did look very realistic compared to what other artists were doing. There's a whole lot of, if you're learning to draw by looking through magazines and drawing what the figures look like and going through fashion magazines for poses, Jim Lee's art reminds me a lot of that. There's a lot of there's a lot of the positioning of the body that I could definitely picture flipping through a fashion magazine and being like, oh yeah, I'm going to go with that pose.
Almost like more of a photo referenced uh, feel as opposed to like Eric Larson or Todd, which maybe they feel like they're making it up a little bit more and exaggerating things for sure.
Yeah, especially on the women. I mean, the women all look like models from magazines. Um, but and he does a lot of visually fun stuff. I mean, there is the spread where you got to turn it the other way to see it. The characters look cool.
Yeah, and you're right with your comment about Jim Lee and the ladies, right? He was probably the best artist of the Image bunch. Him and Mark Silvestri probably the two strongest with the female form.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep. Keeping the ladies hot for the young readers.
Yeah,
It's
something that maybe McFarlane struggled a bit more with. And Larson, I mean, there's something about the exaggeration he does on the female anatomy that, not that he draws them badly or anything, but they're a little bit more kind of exaggerated and cartoony than what, say, Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri are doing.
yeah. Yeah, well, one of the reasons I think I really liked about the Jim book was there was also a lot of action, and that helps make a lot of the art fun, enjoyable to look at. And yeah, it's my number 4.
All right, so we're going to move now on to my number 5 choice, and it is Rob Liefeld on Youngblood. So it's changed quite a bit from probably what I would have chosen as a kid back in the day. Still really do like Rob's art from this period. I've talked about this before, where I'm not quite as enamored with his more modern kind of style, which I feel has lost some of that bombastic energy and it's gotten a little stiffer. You might say, with some of the anatomy and the rendering, he has improved a little bit, maybe moved more into kind of a slightly more illustrative style, but I feel like a lot of the energy gets lost. So I will still give him everything, all the props about the energy and the dynamism of his figures. I think in that way, it kind of resembles a little bit of what Eric Larson's kind of offering up as well, that just that bombastic energy that I really like. But just over the years, maybe not this period specifically, but Rob Liefeld's kind of gone down a little bit as far as, I guess, my artistic preferences and what I like. But I still think he does a really good job on this first issue. But it does suffer a little bit from repeat plot, right? We've talked about this before with Rob Liefeld, where I think the art suffers because the story suffers in a weird way, right? The art's very interesting, but the story itself kind of brings the art down because it's always the same story that he's repeating. And that's kind of why I put it here at number 5. Although we should really just be basing it on the art, which I still think is excellent. It gets somewhat repetitive, I guess, with Liefeld is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, obviously I'm disappointed, but I understand. Because like one of the pages that I like, well, that's your number. So anyway, my number 5 is where you were at number 4, where Cyberforce, and it was tough to pick amongst Cyberforce and Wildcats. They're both really good. I think for me, what brought down Cyberforce a bit, which even though it's got a lot, I mean, it's fantastic art, especially that 2-page spread with Ribclaw leaping from the building, and the color is great. What brought it down for me really came down to costumes. There's not really an exciting enemy until the final page, where there's a very cool looking enemy, but there's just a lot of generic guys in suits. And while I like a lot of the art, I think I know we're, like you said, evaluating art. The flow hurts a little bit to me, where I'm visually enjoying something and it jumps to something else. At this time, like Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee are like so close neck and neck. Like you said, he still has some of his style from X-Men and Wolverine, but he's inking himself, so it changes quite a bit as well. And also at the time seemed that he made a conscious change to make an art style that was more Jim Lee-ish, since that was selling so well, which as a kid that I didn't get how impressive that was. As an adult, just like, oh, you're just gonna draw differently now and do it like somebody else is doing it, is that's got to be wildly challenging. Very impressive that he's that good an artist. He could just make that switch. But tons of really great art, but it just comes in a little lower than Wildcats to me.
The Cyberforce, you said, is your number 4 choice?
5.
5. Okay.
Yeah.
So Wildcats then is we talked.
Yeah, Wildcats was my number 4. Cyberforce.
That's it. Gotcha. Okay. Just so I'm not confused here. All right. So I guess then all that's left is to move on to our number 6 choice,
number
which
6.
In this case we seem to agree on.
Yeah.
I just picked the second printing cover here to be a little bit different. There's the first printing that Mark's holding up there, the nice shiny cover. And the second printing I always thought was weird, because the first cover that you just popped up, right, we don't get the bottom part of his face. And then for some reason they added it on this one, and it just looks really weird to me.
It's in there, but on the original, it's also black and there's just a slight rise.
Well, because of the embossing, yeah, it's actually, I get it. It's actually there, but you don't,
yeah.
Other than holding it in your hands, you wouldn't really notice it, right?
But it's a black mask that he's wearing under the helmet. So switching to silver makes it stand out in a completely different way, rather than it's a hero who has a black mask on and then put a helmet on top of it. So had they gone with a black that was like 95% black or something, where you just barely saw it stand out, I think would have been more effective than changing to silver, where it throws the look off a lot.
It just looks odd, because obviously we know that Shadowhawk's bottom half of his face is not colored silver, and it just feels almost like the production wing of Image Comics threw that in there for some reason. I still think the cover would have looked better. When I looked at the cover Shadowhawk as a kid, and even now, I almost got a sense that I know what you mean about the embossing, but to me, it almost seemed like all that we saw was not his full mask, but just the helmet, and I thought that was just kind of cool. And this kind of destroys it a little bit. It looks a little weird. I do appreciate the Rob Liefeld inks on this cover, though. I do recognize his distinctive kind of style of hatching.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's definitely some extra noodling, and there's just lines going places. Yeah, it was cool when they were all helping each other out. So very fun.
All those jam pieces from the early days, I really like. The cover of Wildcats, I think number 3 or 4, is inked by Rob Liefeld as well, and looks really cool. So all that stuff is fun, and maybe helps to bring Valentino into the Image aesthetic just a little bit more on this cover. And in that first preview of Shadowhawk that was in issue 2 of Youngblood, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that was inked by Rob as well. But yeah, listen, we've talked before about Valentino. Just kind of the odd man out, and that I guess that's why I put him here. Although I do appreciate Shadowhawk the series and the consistency, the fairly solid storyline overall, as opposed to maybe some of the team books from the Mark Silvestris and the Jim Lees.
Yeah.
But there's just something in the art that's not quite as up to that 90s bombastic extreme level as the other guys,
Yeah.
founding fathers.
Yeah, it's all very solid storytelling. There's lots of detail, lots of draftsman work. You can tell that tons has been put into the pages where it's not relying upon an over-the-top figure. So instead, there's all kinds of background details put in. But this is the one that stands out where it feels like it should have been from a smaller publisher. I mean, it just very much feels like an 80s indie book or something from the black and white boom, except with color.
Which Jim Valentino is originally from, right? So it makes sense that it's got a bit of that aesthetic.
Yeah. Yep.
And he does some solid splashes in there, and there's that really cool double page splash of Shadowhawk over the city and stuff. And we talked about when we did the Shadowhawk review, a lot of the architectural work I think has to be noted, because artistically I think it's some of the strongest backgrounds probably in the whole kind of batch of Image founding fathers. But just not enough of that Image excitement in the figures. To really bring it up to the same level as the Jim Lees and the Eric Larsons and the Tom McFarlanes. And I still think the storytelling is really strong too. And visually, it's an easy read, and in the sense that you understand what's going on. So storytelling wise, I think the art definitely does a really good job. It's just not quite at that, again, 90s level of the whole movement of that more extreme in your face art that the other guys kind of represent.
Yeah, it would be, in a way, the best comic if you were looking to learn to draw and you wanted to push yourself. This would be a good one to start, where if you were emulating but trying to improve and
Sure.
put your style upon it, you'd have the most room for growing the imagery, versus if you were to pick up any of the rest of these and wanted to pick it up and draw it. It's like you're going to be stuck trying to live up to the standards that they're setting while you're doing it, versus this one you could get all the good layouts from it and figure work while being able to stamp your style on it, versus it would be just so hard to work with any of the other ones.
Well, yeah, and it seems like Jim Valentino inks himself on this one, so maybe that's part of it too. Where again, I've talked about like the cover, Rob Liefeld inking it, and that preview story does help to bring the excitement level up a bit. And if I'm not mistaken, issue 4 of the first Shadowhawk miniseries is the guest spot with Savage Dragon, and the cover is inked by Eric Larson. So you kind of get a bit of that Eric Larson aesthetic on top of Jim Valentino's layouts or pencils, and it does add a little bit more of that excitement to the image. I don't think necessarily that Jim Valentino's bad at layouts or storytelling or point of view or anything like that. It's maybe just the final aesthetic that he throws on top that's not quite at the same level or similar enough to the aesthetics of all the other Image guys that just seem to have just a more exciting kind of inking style. And later on in the Shadowhawk series, eventually he's going to have Chance Wolf inking over top of him.
Yeah.
Shadowhawk 3, I think it starts, right? And I do feel like Chance Wolf has a bit of that, he inked other Image guys and stuff before this. And actually right now, recently, he's actually inking Rob Liefeld on those new Youngblood comics that he's been producing over the last year. And he's just got a bit more of that Image aesthetic in his inking style. And I think that benefits Jim Valentino and Shadowhawk later on in that third miniseries when he jumps on. The art becomes a little bit more exciting and a little bit more Image-like, I guess is what I'd say.
Yeah. Chance comes on with issue 3 of the first miniseries.
Oh, he does, eh? Okay.
Yeah, and I happened to run across that issue and pull it out and was like, oh, wow, as a visual spectacle, it brings it up a lot. And probably, I mean, if you're working on a book and with all the labor that goes into penciling, if suddenly you don't have to ink it after you get done penciling it, you've got not only more time to pencil, but also mentally there's less there's less chores
Yes,
that
absolutely.
you're
Less
thinking about.
responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can just have some more fun penciling, filling in details, and then pass it on. But Chance brought a lot to the book when he joined. He was a really good pickup.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a two-pronged maybe decision where, Valentino's saying if I get an inker, I could probably work a little bit faster and get the books out faster, which probably helps the consistency and why Shadowhawk was pretty consistent in its schedule and release. And also picking someone who's going to maybe bring the Shadowhawk aesthetic a little bit more in line with what the other guys are doing with the overall kind of image aesthetic. And I think probably succeeded on both fronts.
Yeah, it's a huge improvement for the book. When I pulled out 3, I was wildly impressed with it. One of the things I have an aside when we're done, but yeah, it was. I mean, a lot of our picks, we we kind of varied quite a bit on the top 3. Obviously, I'm still higher on Youngblood than you are. But the top 5, which is all the books, it's like it's so hard to like argue amongst like these 5 books. They're all so visually great, and to try to pick a winner, I mean, it's like arguing the final fractions. Like in 100%, it's like they're all A's. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
just yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, like the degree of variance between my choices is very little, other than maybe the 5 that we were talking about and Shadowhawk, right? But even then, it's not that big of a gap. But between those 5 books, there's very little variance, like you said. It just gets down to a bit of nitpicking and almost like, you know, I feel like with some of them, it's the storyline that ends up hurting the art to a certain extent, and that's why I made those choices and put them in that order. But other than that, listen, we know with Image, the one thing that was going to be solid was the artwork. These were, other than Valentino, and arguably Wills was in there too, even though his book never really came out early on. But with Wills included, these are the top
yeah,
hot successful artists from Marvel. They really are. And you didn't really have the equivalent guy like that at DC Comics at the time. These were all guys working for Marvel, working on the best-selling top books, who started their own thing and their own creator owned characters. And a lot of what was part of their initial success was just that fact that they were the hottest artists and the most popular best-selling artists.
yeah. No, they definitely broke away for a reason, and and it's the fantastic art. I did have one thing that's kind of interesting. The same as you bring up Willis, and hey, if Wetworks had been in there, it would have, of course, slid right in with the rest of these. But it's wild how close of a 7th book Pitt also is. I
That's
was
right.
I was looking back through them, and Pitt's advertised in Spawn #1. So there's a pinup for it in Spawn #1. So we already knew it was coming within almost as soon as Image is established. I mean, Youngblood comes out and then Spawn #1 hits, so that's supposed to be 4 months later. Well, or 3 months later. We'll see if it worked out that way. But Pitt's advertised in that via a pinup, and then it comes out in Youngblood #4, where there's the preview. There was also a ad for it in Shadowhawk #1. So, and then it only follows a few months after where Wetworks should have been.
Yeah.
So it's
I mean,
amazing.
we almost found out about, well, we did find out about Pitt really before Wetworks
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
timeline.
it was advertised beforehand. So it's amazing how close he must have been wrapped up in this. Yet wasn't a founder, but he was right there in the early stages. Not, I guess, not the very beginning, but in the early stages where he was a guy that was coming
He was
on.
close, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that was just an interesting aside. I was kind of looking over their advertising through the comics, and Rob Liefeld has the least of the advertising, but he does have the Shadowhawk preview. or well, a short story really. It's not like you're seeing pages you're going to see in issue 1. He has the Shadowhawk short story, the Pitt short story, and the Supreme short story. Meanwhile, Todd McFarlane is like the advertising master when it comes to outside ads of like other companies advertising in your book. He's blowing the Image guys away. I mean, he's just pulling in all the ads he can while not doing, but then like Wildcats is one of the biggest advertisers of the in-house books, where in each one of his issues, he's showing off the most stuff that's to come from the other guys. But and Shadowhawk also did that quite a bit. Jim Valentino was looking out for, being a smart indie guy, was looking out for, hey guys, we got this coming, we got this coming, we got Pitt, we got Wetworks. Reminder about Youngblood. Hey, don't forget Brigade. We got Infinity. Oh yeah, and I've got a book, The Others, that's coming. He was really hitting that hard. So I was impressed that. And for some reason, Mark Silvestri is kind of like the advertising bottom, where he's got a few outside ads. He doesn't do a lot of in-house ads. He does a bit more of like letting you know what he's got coming, which, you know, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting kind of looking at that, of how much they advertise their own books versus the other guys' books versus just grabbing ads that help pay the bills.
Yeah, it seems like most of the other guys kind of hit the ground running with that and kind of had maybe a bit more vision than Mark Silvestri, in that, you know, we're going to put out secondary books and advertise for the other guys and kind of get the Image name out there. You know, Silvestri, he was the last guy to kind of join in. Maybe he's a little bit more reluctant or doesn't, you know, believe in the project maybe as much as the other guys or something, but he's definitely willing to try. And originally he's kind of, you know, not even his own studio. He's kind of part of Jim Lee's Homage Studios, right? And eventually he kind of gets that everything's kind of successful, and he starts putting out those secondary books and creating his own studio and stuff. But he seemed to have been kind of a little bit slower on the build up there to advertise and push the Image books.
Yeah, it's interesting with their formation where Rob's initially going out just to do a book. So he definitely is the first one coming out because he was already doing Youngblood. There wasn't Image, there was just him doing Youngblood out of Malibu. And then Todd, who had already stepped away from the industry, is like, oh, I didn't know you're doing this thing. I want to get on board. Plus, sick of people making money off all my art and putting out products, and I don't get a percent, or, you know, sometimes they don't even send me a copy. And then Eric Larson was number 3. So then that was their original nucleus of those 3 guys. So it does make total sense how their books came out.
Yeah.
And then their big get was like Jim Lee going, okay, you know what? I will step away. They paid me X number of dollars per page and then turned around and sold the original art for more than they paid me.
Yeah.
And put it on a t-shirt. And I'm not really getting that. Yeah, okay. I've done the math. Mathematically, I only have to have a fraction of the sales to make what I'm making. This is a calculated risk where I should be able to break even with what I'm doing. If I need to reverse course, I could probably go back. They're going to welcome me back. And if it does work, I'm going to hit the lottery. So he was.
That's it. It was a very calculated risk, I think, at that time. They knew how the market was going. And they knew that no matter what, even though it's been said, you know, oh, they're rebels and the editors hated them and this and that, if for some reason it didn't work out and they were all willing to go back to Marvel, Marvel would have brought them in, no problem, because they knew they would sell a shitload of books, right? So, you know, they knew deep down that, you know, they could always go back to that situation if this didn't work out. Luckily, it did work out, and eventually some of them did go back, right? So we've got Heroes Reborn with Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee in the mid-90s. You know, Eric Larson went back right now and reviewing some Defenders issues that he did in the early 2000s. So I think Todd McFarlane is really the only guy to never, ever go back.
The Batman crossover, that was kind of it.
Sure. Yeah. But to go back to Marvel specifically, because I feel like, you know, a lot of his problems had to do with Marvel. He worked at DC before that, and before he was very popular. So maybe he didn't have quite as much of a negative vibe from DC than he did from Marvel, because the height of his success was at Marvel, and that's who he felt probably were not recognizing him enough, and with that whole thing. I don't even what is it? I don't even get a shirt. Is that
Yeah,
the quote? I don't even
right.
get a T-shirt. Uh,
Yeah.
and let's not forget Todd too. It doesn't get talked a lot about, but he left Marvel. His next project, he was always a farther thinking guy, right? Past, not just within comics, but past comics, right? I think comics to him, to a certain extent, was kind of a stepping stone to something bigger. Even though he was the biggest within the comic industry, at least at that point. When he left Spider-Man originally, he was doing hockey cards, right? He was trying to start up a hockey card set that would compete with Upper Deck, right, or whatever was out at the time. And it just seems like the sports card market fell out before the comic book market. It didn't quite work out for him. And then this opportunity with Image, well, he's not stupid. He's realizing the comics market is still really strong. His name is still really strong. Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, all these guys are starting up new books. So, you know, he gambles to a certain extent, but not that much, and jumps in. And I think is the best selling of all of them, of the founding fathers. I believe is Spawn #1, right? I think his Spawn is the #1 selling Image issue.
Another thing that was interesting to me is when I was looking over the ads, as much as Todd was not sold on Jim Valentino and Rob having to really push to bring Jim Valentino along, Todd does do a pinup of Shadowhawk in Spawn #3 to juice the release of Shadowhawk #1 that hits
Sure.
the shelves that month. So he did still, he like wanted to help him. Plus Spawn appears briefly in Shadowhawk, so he's lending the character over, which helps build the universe, but also it's like he's trying to assist his
Yeah.
success.
Well, Todd's great at marketing, right? So he understands the value of doing something like that, whether he's doing it out of the kindness of his own heart to help someone else out, or just to get the Image name out there. Todd was really the guy who was pushing Image, the company, and the concept as much as possible when he was going out there. And obviously, he's a bit more of a loudmouth than the other guys, so he got a lot of press for that. So he was a good marketing director for Image and Spawn, of course. And like I said, the sports cards didn't work out. Spawn worked out incredibly well, and from that, he moved into, and it's been talked about lots in interviews with him and stuff. Then he got the concept for the toys, and there was something that I guess more so than the trading cards he could have. He knew there's a very good chance that he'd have success in, right? And just because of his visual sense, he knew that the toys he would make would be just a little bit better than what was out at the market at that time. A little more detail, a little more articulation, and it worked out for him because as much money as he made off of Spawn and the comic book, I'm sure he's made tenfold that with the toy company, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, the toys were a huge success.
And he's really just focusing on that now. He hasn't done any comic work in years. He does a pinup once in a while. He kind of barely writes the Spawn title. So his focus now is really on the toys, and apparently getting another Spawn movie to come out. But I've been hearing that for like 12 years now. So we'll see if that ever comes about.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
Jamie Foxx, right?
That has been a long time that we've been hearing about that.
Yeah, yeah. He brings it up every once in a while. Oh, we're just on the cusp, but yeah, nothing seems to materialize right now. But again, he's got the toy company to fall back and rely on. So I'm sure he's not hurting for cash, even after splurging on those baseballs and having to pay Tony Twist and all those licensing court battles.
Yeah.
Note to people out there making comics: don't name your characters after real people. Just not a good idea.
Oh yeah, that's the most ridiculous lawsuit ever. I mean, a nickname. It's like it's actually his only fault in it was telling people that that's where he got it from.
That's right. But I still think that's kind of ridiculous, though, because it's not the guy's actual name. So the judge in this
Yeah.
his decision in this is very odd to me from the beginning. I remember reading about it. I remember just thinking, well, it's not, if you steal the actual guy's name, that's one thing, but to steal a nickname, you know. But hey, Gene Simmons from Kiss has trademarked and copyrighted OJ, right? So anyone who wants to, you've got an orange juice ad and you say OJ in it, you got to give Gene Simmons some money. So,
Yeah, that was such an odd judgment of it wasn't a top-notch guy, not highly recognizable. So the whole concept of damages doesn't make sense at all. Like where would you have lost anything?
Well,
Yeah,
because
it's hard.
he was arguing that now my name is associated with a mob leader, right? Like, because that's the character in the book, and it's like, well, other than comic book readers or people who collect Spawn, does
Yeah,
anyone really know in general pop culture about this mafia guy Tony Twist from Spawn? I don't
yeah,
think so. Not really.
yeah,
It wasn't that widespread. So
yeah. That's why you're not getting those endorsement deals.
yeah, exactly. It's not because you're a sucky hockey player. Yeah.
Yeah, what a fortunate payday for him. That doesn't make any
It,
sense.
it, it worked out well for him for sure.
Yeah,
All right, we are in
yeah.
the weeds now, so I guess we're gonna close this one up today with those last comments. I just do want to mention out there, guys, that this is officially the 500th episode of Big Baby Reviews. So I'm glad, Mark, you could be there to help me out on this one. Really appreciate it. And everyone out there, thank you for all your support up to this point. We're still trying to get more subscribers, obviously, get those numbers up, and eventually get to a point where YouTube helps us out even more in spreading the Big Baby Reviews word out there. So if you're still watching and you are subscribed, I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you, and it really helps the channel out, and it helps us grow and get out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. So, Mark, once again, thanks for joining me. Anything you want to mention? Any shows coming up?
Oh, next week I go to Cleveland Comedy Festival. So yeah, I'll be there for several days doing shows, which is fun. I got bumped up. First one I was on opening night. This time I am on opening night and Friday night, so that's a big improvement. And then I come back to do another show at my home club, and then race out of town to do another show at a different spot. So I have like 6 straight nights of comedy next week. It's gonna be quite the hustle.
For sure, but it's a good and fortuitous hustle,
Yeah,
right? It's great to hear that you're moving on up and it's going well for you. So that's awesome, man. Very cool.
thank you. Yeah, same.
All right, well that is it. Then we are going to leave you with that, and everyone out there, thanks again for watching. Mark, thanks for joining us, and everyone have an awesome day.
See you guys.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KingComics.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.